The harsh Montana sun cast long shadows over Riverside as Virginia Nichols clutched the crumpled letter in her trembling hands. After traveling over 2,000 miles from Boston, the words on the page felt like a knife to her heart. The stagecoach had deposited her and her single trunk in this dusty frontier town just hours ago, and already her future had collapsed like a house of cards. "He ain't coming," the station master had informed her with uncomfortable pity in his eyes. "Left this for you, though." Virginia reread the hastily scrawled note for the 20th time. Her intended husband, Mr. Harold Jenkins, apologized that he had found another woman, a widow with property, and would not be meeting his mail-order bride after all. He wished her the very best and enclosed $5 for her return journey east, $5. As if that could repair the humiliation, the betrayal, the utter devastation of being abandoned in a strange town after selling everything she owned to come west. She wiped away a tear with the back of her gloved hand. 23 years old, unmarried with no family and no prospects in Boston, becoming a mail-order bride had seemed her only option. Virginia had spent months exchanging letters with Harold, believing his promises of a good life on his ranch outside Riverside. "Miss, you been sitting there a fair while. You waiting on someone." Virginia looked up to see a tall man silhouetted against the setting sun. His wide-brimmed hat shadowed his features, but she could make out broad shoulders and a stance that suggested both strength and caution. "I." Her voice caught. What could she say? That she was waiting for a fiancé who wasn't coming, that she had nowhere to go. The man stepped closer, and she could see him clearly now. Dusty clothes, a weathered face that had seen its share of sun and hardship, but kind eyes. Blue eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners. He couldn't be much more than 30. "You're crying," he observed softly. Virginia hastily dabbed at her cheeks. "I'm quite all right, sir." He glanced down at the crumpled paper in her hands. "Let me guess. You're Harold Jenkins' mail-order bride." Her eyes widened. "How did you know?" The man sighed and removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair. "Word travels fast in Riverside. Jenkins has been bragging about his new arrangement with the widow Carson. I'm sorry, miss." Fresh tears welled in Virginia's eyes. The public humiliation was worse than she'd imagined. The man knelt beside her trunk. "My name's Matthew Brennan. I ranch about 10 miles outside of town." "Virginia Nichols," she replied automatically, years of proper Boston upbringing asserting themselves even in her distress. Matthew Brennan's eyes traveled from her neat traveling dress to her polished boots, taking in her posture and the way she held herself. "Boston," he guessed. She nodded. "Well, Miss Nichols, you can't stay here on the platform all night. You have somewhere to go." Virginia glanced down at the $5 note. "I suppose I could inquire about a room at the hotel until I—" Until what? She couldn't afford passage back east. She had nothing and no one waiting for her in Boston. "Jenkins is a fool," Matthew Brennan said suddenly, his voice hard. He nodded at the letter still clutched in her hand. "He doesn't deserve you anyway." The unexpected kindness in those words broke something inside Virginia. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob in earnest, mortified to be falling apart in front of a stranger, but unable to maintain her composure a moment longer. She heard Matthew clear his throat uncomfortably. "Miss Nichols, I don't mean to presume, but there's a boarding house run by a respectable widow, Mrs. Holloway. It's where most single ladies in town stay. I could escort you there if you'd permit it." Virginia managed to compose herself enough to look up at him. "That's very kind, Mr. Brennan, but I fear I have limited funds." Something like anger flickered across his face. "Jenkins didn't even provide for your return passage." $5, she said weakly, holding up the note. Matthew Brennan muttered something under his breath that sounded distinctly uncomplimentary to Harold Jenkins. Mrs. Holloway charges $3 a week, meals included. She's a good woman. Sometimes she lets ladies work for their keep helping with cooking or cleaning. Virginia straightened her shoulders. I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Brennan. A slight smile tugged at his lips. I didn't think you were, Miss Nichols. Not if you were brave enough to travel all this way alone. He hefted her trunk as if it weighed nothing. Come along then. Riverside isn't much, but it's a decent town with decent people. Present company accepted, he added, with a nod in the general direction of what she assumed was Harold Jenkins' ranch. Virginia followed him down the dusty Main Street. The small frontier town was nothing like Boston, with its wooden boardwalks and hitching posts instead of paved streets and gas lamps. Yet there was something honest about it, something unvarnished and real. Have you lived in Riverside long, Mr. Brennan? She asked, trying to distract herself from her predicament. 8 years. Came west after the war looking for a fresh start, found this valley and never wanted to leave. He glanced at her. It grows on you, Montana territory. Not as refined as the East, but there's a freedom here that gets in your blood. They stopped in front of a neat 2-story house with a small garden out front. Matthew set her trunk down and knocked on the door. A plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes opened it. Matthew Brennan. What brings you to town on a Tuesday, Mrs. Holloway? This is Miss Virginia Nichols. She's in need of lodging. The older woman's eyes widened in understanding. You're the lady coming for Harold Jenkins. Virginia flushed with embarrassment, but Mrs. Holloway quickly continued. That man. When I heard what he'd done, I told Martha at the general store that no good would come of it. Come in, dear. You look exhausted. Matthew tipped his hat. I'll leave you in Mrs. Holloway's capable hands, Miss Nichols. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Brennan, Virginia said sincerely. He hesitated. I'll be in town for supplies on Saturday. Perhaps I could call and see how you're settling in. Before Virginia could respond, Mrs. Holloway answered for her. That would be lovely, Matthew. Now come inside, Miss Nichols, and I'll show you to your room. As the door closed behind her, Virginia caught a last glimpse of Matthew Brennan, standing in the street watching her with those kind blue eyes. For the first time since arriving in Riverside, she felt a tiny flicker of hope. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was clean and welcoming, if modest. Virginia was shown to a small room on the second floor, simply furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. It's not fancy, Mrs. Holloway apologized, but the linens are clean and you'll have your privacy. It's perfect, Virginia assured her. But I must be honest with you. I have very little money. The older woman waved her hand dismissively. We'll work something out. Can you cook? Virginia nodded. Her family's financial difficulties in Boston had forced her to learn domestic skills that many ladies of her background never acquired. Good. I could use help with the meals. I have 4 other boarders, all respectable ladies who work in town. The school teacher, the milliner's assistant, and 2 girls who work at the hotel. Mrs. Holloway studied her thoughtfully. You have education, I can tell by your speech. Yes, my father was a professor before he passed. Well, Riverside is growing. They might need help at the school, or the mercantile always needs someone with good penmanship for their accounts. She patted Virginia's hand. Don't you worry. A smart girl like you will find your place here. After Mrs. Holloway left, Virginia sat on the edge of the bed, the crumpled letter still in her hand. She smoothed it out, reading Harold Jenkins' careless words one last time, then deliberately tore it into tiny pieces and dropped them into the wastebasket. She was stranded in a frontier town with almost no money and no prospects. But she was Virginia Nichols, and she would not be defeated by a cowardly man's rejection. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity and determination. The week passed in a blur of new experiences. True to her word, Mrs. Holloway put Virginia to work in the kitchen, where she quickly proved her worth. The other boarders were kind, especially Emily Watson, the schoolteacher who took Virginia under her wing. "Riverside needs educated women," Emily told her over tea. "The town's growing so fast, I can hardly keep up with all the children. If you're interested, the school board might consider hiring an assistant." By Friday, Virginia had secured a position as Emily's assistant at the schoolhouse, starting the following Monday. The pay was modest, but combined with her arrangement at the boarding house, it would allow her to survive. She was hanging laundry in the backyard on Saturday morning when she heard Mrs. Holloway calling her name. "Virginia, you have a visitor." Her heart quickened inexplicably as she smoothed her apron and went inside. Matthew Brennan stood in the parlor, hat in hand, looking slightly uncomfortable amid the feminine furnishings. "Miss Nichols," he said, straightening when he saw her. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mr. Brennan. It's good to see you again." Mrs. Holloway bustled about, insisting on serving coffee. Virginia noticed that Matthew had cleaned up for his visit to town. His clothes were fresh, his face cleanly shaved, his brown hair neatly combed. "How are you settling in?" he asked once they were seated. Virginia told him about her new position at the school, watching as his face broke into a genuine smile. "That's excellent news. The children will be lucky to have you." "Have you met our school teacher, Miss Watson?" Mrs. Holloway asked innocently. Something flashed across Matthew's face. "Yes, we've met." Virginia sensed a story there but didn't pry. Instead, she asked, "What brings you to town today, Mr. Brennan?" "Supplies, mostly. Winter will be here before we know it." He hesitated. "And I was hoping, if you're not otherwise engaged, that you might allow me to show you around Riverside properly." Mrs. Holloway beamed. "What a splendid idea! Virginia hasn't had a chance to see much beyond this house and the school." Virginia felt her cheeks warm. "That would be lovely, thank you." As they walked down Riverside's Main Street, Virginia was acutely aware of the glances they received. "People are staring," she murmured. Matthew's lips twitched. "Small towns run on gossip, Miss Nichols. By supper time, half of Riverside will be speculating about us." "Oh dear. Don't worry. Your reputation is safe with me." He led her past the general store, the bank, the blacksmith shop, pointing out local landmarks and introducing her to townspeople they encountered. Everyone seemed to know and respect Matthew Brennan. The storekeeper offered him credit when he didn't have enough cash for his supplies. The blacksmith asked his opinion on a new horse. Even the banker tipped his hat with deference. "You seem well regarded in Riverside," Virginia observed as they stopped for lemonade at the small cafe. Matthew shrugged. "I mind my business and help when I can. During last year's blizzard, my ranch became a shelter for 3 families who got stranded." In a place like this, folks remember such things. "Tell me about your ranch," Virginia prompted, genuinely curious. His eyes lit up. "It's not the biggest spread, about 500 acres, but it's good land with a year-round creek. I run cattle mostly and grow enough to be self-sufficient." He smiled apologetically. "It's nothing fancy, but it's mine, free and clear. You built it yourself. Every inch. Started with a 1-room cabin and added on as I could afford it." He studied her face. "It must seem primitive compared to Boston." "Boston wasn't all mansions and fine living, Mr. Brennan. Not for everyone," he nodded, accepting her answer without pressing for details. "Call me Matthew, please. Mr. Brennan makes me feel like my father." "Then you must call me Virginia." They walked to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The vast Montana sky stretched endlessly above them, painted with the golden light of late afternoon. It's beautiful, Virginia breathed. So open. That's what struck me when I first came west. All that space and possibility. Matthew turned to face her. Virginia, I hope you don't mind my asking, but what will you do now? Will you stay in Riverside? She looked out at the rolling grasslands. I don't have much choice. I can't afford passage back east, and even if I could. She shook her head. There's nothing for me there. I'm sorry about Jenkins, Matthew said quietly. He's a fool who doesn't know what he threw away. Virginia felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. It was a business arrangement, nothing more. We'd never met. Still. A man should honor his commitments. He hesitated. Virginia, there's something I should tell you about Jenkins. She tensed. What about him? He's not a bad man exactly, but he's known for his calculations. The widow Carson has the best water rights in the county. Jenkins has been trying to get his hands on her property for years. Virginia felt sick. So he never intended to marry me at all. I can't say for certain, but the timing is suspicious. Matthew's expression darkened. If it's any consolation, I don't think his arrangement with the widow will last. She's a shrewd businesswoman, not easily fooled. They walked back toward the boarding house in contemplative silence. At the gate, Virginia turned to him. Thank you for today, Matthew. It was healing. The pleasure was mine. He shifted his weight, suddenly seeming nervous. Virginia, I know this might seem forward, but I was wondering if you would permit me to call on you properly. Not out of pity, he added quickly, but because I enjoy your company. Virginia studied his face, looking for any sign of insincerity. She found none. Only open, honest interest and perhaps a hint of vulnerability. I would like that very much, she said softly. His smile was like the Montana sunrise, warm, bright, and full of promise. As autumn descended on Montana territory, Virginia settled into life in Riverside. Her position at the school proved more demanding than she'd anticipated, but also more rewarding. The children, many from ranching families who valued education as a precious commodity, were eager to learn. Matthew called at the boarding house every Saturday without fail. Sometimes they walked through town, other times they sat in Mrs. Holloway's parlor and talked for hours. Virginia learned about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his service in the Union Army during the Civil War, and his journey west, seeking a new beginning. In turn, she told him about her father's death, which had left her mother and her in genteel poverty, and her mother's subsequent passing after a long illness. How she'd been forced to work as a companion to a wealthy, ill-tempered old woman, until the woman's death had left her without employment or connections. That's when I saw the advertisement, Virginia explained one crisp October afternoon as they sat on a bench outside the schoolhouse. Harold Jenkins seeking a bride of good character and education to share his life in Montana territory. Matthew's jaw tightened. Jenkins has been spreading stories in town, says you misrepresented yourself in your letters, Virginia gasped. That's absolutely false, I know. Nobody believes him anyway. Matthew took her hand. Virginia, I need to ask you something. Her heart hammered in her chest. Over the weeks, their friendship had deepened into something more, though neither had put words to it. Next week is the Harvest Festival, he continued. Would you do me the honor of attending with me? As my special guest. The Harvest Festival was Riverside's biggest social event of the year. Attending with Matthew would make a public statement about their relationship. I would be delighted, she answered, squeezing his hand. The night of the Harvest Festival arrived with a buzz of excitement. The town square had been transformed with lanterns, hay bales, and tables laden with food. A small band played lively tunes, and couples young and old danced beneath the stars. Virginia had spent her meager savings on fabric for a new dress, a lovely blue cotton that Mrs. Holloway had helped her sew. When Matthew arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze made every penny and pricked finger worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The festival was everything Virginia had hoped for: warm cider, delicious food, and the welcoming community she'd come to appreciate. Matthew introduced her to his neighboring ranchers and their families, all of whom treated her with respect and interest. "Matthew speaks highly of you," said one weathered cattleman. "Says you've got the school children reading Shakespeare, of all things." Virginia laughed. "Only brief passages. They seem to enjoy the drama of it." As the evening progressed, Matthew led her to the dance floor. "I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer," he admitted. "That makes two of us," Virginia replied. But as they moved together to the music, she realized they fit perfectly. His hand at her waist, hers on his shoulder, they moved as one across the wooden platform that served as a dance floor. "Everyone's watching us," she whispered, noticing the glances. Matthew smiled down at her. "Let them watch. I'm proud to be seen with you, Virginia Nichols." The music slowed and he drew her closer. In that moment, with the stars shining above and the warmth of Matthew's arms around her, Virginia knew she was falling in love with this kind, steadfast man. Their perfect evening shattered when Harold Jenkins appeared, clearly intoxicated, with a hard-faced blonde woman on his arm. "Well, look who it is," Jenkins sneered, blocking their path as they left the dance floor. "My mail-order bride found herself a new mark." Matthew's arm tightened around Virginia's waist. "Move along, Jenkins. You're making a fool of yourself. I'm making a fool of myself." Jenkins laughed harshly. "This woman tried to trap me with lies, claimed she was young and beautiful." He looked Virginia up and down with exaggerated disgust. Virginia felt as if she'd been slapped. She was neither a great beauty nor was she plain, but she had never misrepresented herself. Her letters to Jenkins had been honest and straightforward. The blonde woman, presumably the widow Carson, tugged at Jenkins' arm. "Harold, let's go." But Jenkins wasn't finished. "She said she could cook, too. Probably can't boil water without burning it." Something dangerous flashed in Matthew's eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was deceptively soft. "Apologize to the lady, Jenkins." "Or what?" Jenkins swayed on his feet. "You'll defend her honor. She's damaged goods, Brennan, Boston trash looking for a meal ticket west." Matthew moved so fast Virginia barely saw it happen. One moment Jenkins was smirking, the next he was sprawled in the dirt, blood streaming from his nose. The widow Carson shrieked, and the music stuttered to a halt as everyone turned to stare. "I believe the lady deserves an apology," Matthew said calmly, standing over Jenkins. The sheriff, a gray-haired man named Porter, pushed through the crowd. "What's going on here?" "Jenkins insulted Miss Nichols," someone in the crowd volunteered. "That right?" Sheriff Porter looked from Matthew's rigid stance to Jenkins' bleeding face. "Well, seems to me justice has been served. Now get up, Jenkins, and go sleep it off." Two men helped Jenkins to his feet. He glared at Matthew but seemed to have lost his appetite for confrontation. "This isn't over, Brennan," he muttered as the widow led him away. Virginia stood frozen, mortified at being the center of such a scene. When Matthew turned to her, concern etched on his face, she couldn't bear to meet his eyes. "I'd like to go home now, please," she whispered. They walked back to the boarding house in silence. At the door, Virginia finally spoke. "You shouldn't have done that." Matthew looked stunned. "He insulted you, publicly. And now everyone will be talking about us, about me." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I've worked so hard to build a respectable life here, to prove myself worthy of the community's trust with their children. Virginia, no one blames you for Jenkins' behavior. Perhaps not, but they'll remember the scene. The Boston mail order bride who caused trouble at the Harvest Festival. Her voice broke. Maybe I should never have come west. Matthew reached for her hand, his expression pained. Don't say that, please. I need time to think, Matthew. She withdrew her hand. Good night. Inside, she collapsed on her bed and wept, all the humiliation and uncertainty of the past weeks crashing over her. She had begun to believe she could build a new life here, perhaps even find happiness with Matthew. Now, it seemed her past would always define her. Morning brought clarity and a measure of calm. Virginia dressed carefully for church, knowing the entire town would be watching her. If she hid away, it would only confirm the worst gossip. To her surprise, Mrs. Holloway and the other boarders rallied around her. Hold your head high, Mrs. Holloway advised as they walked to the small white church. You've done nothing wrong. At the church steps, Matthew waited. He looked as if he hadn't slept, his face drawn with worry. Virginia, may I speak with you? Mrs. Holloway ushered the other girls inside, leaving them alone. I'm sorry for how I reacted last night, Virginia said before he could speak. You were defending me and I was ungrateful. Relief flooded his face. No, you were right. I should have handled it differently. Perhaps we were both right, she conceded with a small smile. Matthew took both her hands in his. Virginia, I need to tell you something. After I left you last night, I went to see Sheriff Porter. I told him everything, how Jenkins had contracted to marry you, how he abandoned you without proper means to return east. Virginia's eyes widened. Why would you do that? Because the law takes a dim view of such behavior. Porter's going to have a word with Jenkins about his financial and moral obligations. Matthew, no, I don't want his charity. It's not charity, it's justice. His blue eyes were intense. Virginia, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. I can't bear the thought of you suffering because of a man like Jenkins. Virginia was touched by his concern, but confused by his motives. Matthew, what are you saying? I'm saying. He took a deep breath. I'm saying that I care for you deeply, and I want to help you not because I pity you, but because I'm falling in love with you. The world seemed to stop. Virginia searched his face, scarcely daring to believe what she was hearing. Matthew. You don't have to say anything now, he rushed on. I know it's sudden. I know you came here expecting to marry another man, but I want you to know how I feel and that my intentions are honorable. The church bell rang, summoning the congregation inside. We should go in, Virginia said softly. Matthew nodded, looking disappointed but not surprised by her non-response. Throughout the service, Virginia found her thoughts returning to Matthew's declaration. Was it possible to fall in love in such a short time? Yet when she examined her own feelings, she knew the answer. The comfort she felt in his presence, the joy that suffused her when he smiled, the way her heart raced when their hands touched, these weren't the feelings of mere friendship. After church, Virginia made a decision. Instead of walking back with the other boarders, she approached Matthew. Would you walk with me? His face brightened. Of course. They strolled toward the creek that ran at the edge of town, a private spot where they could speak freely. I've been thinking about what you said, Virginia began. About your feelings. Matthew watched her face carefully, hope and trepidation mingling in his expression. When I came to Riverside, I was at my lowest point, abandoned, humiliated, desperate. She turned to face him fully. You showed me kindness when I needed it most. But what I feel for you now isn't gratitude, Matthew. It's deeper than that. Virginia, are you saying? I'm saying that I care for you too, more than I thought possible in such a short time. The joy that spread across his face made her heart soar. He reached for her hands, holding them gently. Virginia Nichols, you've made me the happiest man in Montana Territory. She laughed, feeling lighthearted for the first time since arriving in Riverside. We barely know each other. I know enough, he said seriously. I know you're brave and kind and intelligent. I know you face challenges with dignity. I know I want to spend more time learning everything else about you. And I want to learn everything about you, she replied softly. Matthew leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Virginia closed the distance between them, and their lips met in a sweet, tender kiss that promised much more to come. As they walked back toward town, hand in hand, Virginia felt as if her life had turned a corner. The future, which had seemed so bleak just weeks ago, now sparkled with possibility. "Will you come to my ranch next Saturday?" Matthew asked. "I'd like to show you my home." The invitation held significance, and they both knew it. "I'd like that very much." The following Saturday dawned bright and clear. Matthew arrived at the boarding house with a wagon, helping Virginia up to the seat beside him with gentle hands. "It's about an hour's drive," he explained as they set off. "The ranch is in a small valley east of town." The journey passed quickly as they talked and laughed, sharing stories and observations. Virginia found herself falling deeper in love with this man who combined strength and gentleness in such perfect measure. When they crested a small rise, Matthew pulled the horses to a halt. There it is. Brennan Ranch. Below them stretched a picturesque valley. A neat log cabin stood near a bubbling creek, smoke curling from its chimney. Behind it, a barn and corral housed several horses. Beyond, cattle grazed peacefully on the autumn grass. "It's beautiful," Virginia breathed. "It's not much compared to what you're used to," Matthew said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "It's perfect." And she meant it. The ranch embodied everything Matthew was: solid, unpretentious, full of quiet strength and natural beauty. As they approached, a large black and white dog bounded toward them, barking joyfully. "That's Scout," Matthew said. "Don't worry, he's friendly." Scout proved to be as gentle as his master, quickly accepting Virginia as a friend. Matthew helped her down from the wagon, then led her toward the cabin. "I have someone else for you to meet." A weathered, gray-haired man emerged from the cabin, wiping his hands on his apron. "About time you got back. The stew's nearly done. Virginia, this is Tom Bishop. He helps around the ranch and keeps me fed." "Tom, Miss Virginia Nichols." Tom's eyes twinkled as he shook her hand. "So you're the lady who's had Matthew whistling for weeks. Pleasure to meet you, miss." Virginia laughed at Matthew's embarrassed expression. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Bishop." "Just Tom, miss. No need for formalities here." He gestured toward the cabin. "Come on in. I've got coffee brewing." The interior of the cabin surprised Virginia. Though simple, it was clean and well organized with handcrafted furniture, bookshelves lined with volumes, and even a small piano in one corner. "My mother's," Matthew explained, following her gaze. "I brought it west with me. Can't play a note myself, but I couldn't bear to part with it." The main room served as kitchen, dining room, and sitting area, with two doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. A large fireplace provided both heat and cooking space, though she noticed a cast iron stove as well. "It's lovely," Virginia said honestly. Tom served them a delicious stew with fresh baked bread. After the meal, he tactfully excused himself to check on the horses, leaving Virginia and Matthew alone. Matthew took her on a tour of the ranch, showing her the spring that provided fresh water year-round, the garden where he grew vegetables, and the orchard of young apple trees he'd planted. "In a few years, they'll bear fruit," he said, touching one slender trunk almost tenderly. "I believe in planning for the future." As the afternoon waned, they sat on a bench outside the cabin, watching the sun slide toward the western mountains. Virginia had never felt more at peace. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked, his arm around her shoulders. "That I never expected to find this," she admitted. "When I came west, I was seeking security, not happiness. And now," she turned to face him, "now I want both." Something shifted in Matthew's expression. He took her hands in his. "Virginia, I know it's soon, too soon, perhaps. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He drew a deep breath. "I love you. I want to build a life with you, here if you're willing." Virginia's heart swelled with emotion. "Matthew, are you asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me. Not because you need a husband or I need a wife, but because I love you and I believe we could be happy together." Tears of joy filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." The kiss they shared sealed their promise, tender at first, then deepening with the passion of true love discovered. As they drove back to Riverside in the gathering dusk, Virginia's hand securely in Matthew's, she marveled at the twists of fate that had brought her here. Harold Jenkins' rejection, which had seemed like the end of her hopes, had actually been the beginning of something far more precious than she could have imagined. "What are you smiling about?" Matthew asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Virginia squeezed his hand. "I was just thinking that sometimes what seems like our worst moment can lead us to our greatest joy." "Jenkins doesn't deserve you anyway," Matthew said, echoing his words from their first meeting. "But I'll spend my life trying to." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of planning and preparation. Mrs. Holloway, delighted by the engagement, helped Virginia prepare a simple wedding dress. The schoolchildren, excited that their teacher's assistant was marrying the respected rancher, created handmade decorations for the church. Word spread quickly through Riverside. To Virginia's surprise, most reactions were positive. Many townspeople admitted they'd been concerned when Jenkins abandoned her and were relieved that she'd found happiness with Matthew instead. "You two make a better match anyway," Mrs. Porter, the sheriff's wife, told her. "Matthew Brennan's worth 10 of Harold Jenkins." 2 weeks before the wedding, Virginia was leaving the schoolhouse when she saw a familiar figure approaching Harold Jenkins, alone and sober this time. Her first instinct was to avoid him, but she stood her ground. She was no longer the desperate, humiliated woman who had arrived in Riverside clutching a crumpled letter. "Miss Nichols," Jenkins said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" Virginia regarded him coolly. "What can I do for you, Mr. Jenkins?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I've come to apologize for my behavior at the festival and, before that," Virginia said nothing, waiting. "Sheriff Porter had a talk with me," Jenkins continued. "Made me see things differently, and the widow Carson." He winced. "Let's just say that arrangement didn't work out." "I'm sorry to hear that," Virginia said, not entirely sincerely. "The thing is, Miss Nichols, I behaved dishonorably. I've brought this." He handed her an envelope. "It's the money for your return passage east, with interest." Virginia looked at the envelope without taking it. "That's not necessary, Mr. Jenkins. I'm staying in Riverside." "So I heard. You and Brennan." Jenkins grimaced. "He's a good man." "Yes, he is." Jenkins awkwardly extended the envelope again. "Please take it. Not for passage then, but as compensation for the inconvenience." Virginia considered refusing, but something in his expression, genuine remorse, perhaps made her reach for the envelope. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins." He nodded, replaced his hat, and turned to go. After a few steps, he paused and looked back. "For what it's worth, Miss Nichols, I think you'll be happier with Brennan than you ever would have been with me." As she watched him walk away, Virginia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The past was truly behind her now. That evening, when Matthew called at the boarding house, she showed him the envelope and told him about Jenkins' apology. "What will you do with the money?" he asked. Virginia smiled. "I thought perhaps we could use it to buy a piano for the schoolhouse." The children should have music in their lives. Matthew's eyes softened. You're an extraordinary woman, Virginia Nichols. Soon to be Virginia Brennan, she reminded him with a smile. The wedding day arrived with perfect late autumn weather, crisp and clear, with golden sunlight filtering through the church windows. Virginia, dressed in a simple ivory gown with blue ribbons that matched her eyes, felt none of the doubt or fear she might have expected. Instead, a profound sense of rightness filled her as she walked down the aisle to where Matthew waited. He looked handsome in his best suit, his face alight with love and pride as he watched her approach. Tom Bishop stood beside him as best man, beaming like a proud father. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When they exchanged vows, Virginia's voice rang clear with certainty. This was no business arrangement, no desperate bid for security. This was love, freely given and joyfully received. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Matthew's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward at the town hall was filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Virginia, surrounded by new friends who had become like family, marveled at how quickly Riverside had become home. As the evening wound down, Matthew led her to the waiting wagon, decorated with ribbons and flowers by the schoolchildren. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Brennan?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "More than ready," she replied, her heart full. The journey to the ranch, their ranch, now seemed magical in the moonlight. When they arrived, Virginia gasped in surprise. The cabin glowed with lamplight and fresh flowers adorned every surface. "Tom's work," Matthew explained. "He's staying in town tonight to give us privacy." He lifted her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, a gesture that made her laugh with delight. "Welcome home, Virginia," he whispered, setting her gently on her feet inside the cabin. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. After so many years of uncertainty, she had found her place in the world, not just a physical home, but a home in Matthew's heart. Later, as they lay entwined in each other's arms, Matthew stroked her hair gently. "Any regrets?" Virginia raised her head to look into his eyes. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." He smiled and pulled her closer. "We have our whole lives ahead of us now." Over the following months, Virginia and Matthew settled into married life with surprising ease. She continued teaching at the school 3 days a week, while learning the workings of the ranch. Matthew, in turn, helped with her projects, including the installation of the piano at the schoolhouse, which became a centerpiece for community gatherings. Spring brought new calves to the ranch and the first blossoms on Matthew's apple trees. One warm May evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Virginia took Matthew's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "What?" His eyes widened in realization. "Virginia, are you?" She nodded, her eyes shining with happy tears. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby in November." Matthew whooped with joy, lifting her from the bench and spinning her around before carefully setting her down again. "I'm sorry, should you be resting? Are you feeling well?" Virginia laughed at his sudden concern. "I'm perfectly fine, Matthew. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But not my wife, not carrying my child." His voice was filled with wonder as he knelt before her, pressing a gentle kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your mama and papa can't wait to meet you." That night, as Matthew slept beside her, Virginia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The crumpled letter that had once represented her greatest humiliation now seemed like a gift, the first step on a path to true happiness. She thought of a line from one of the Shakespeare passages she taught her students. "All's well that ends well." But this wasn't an ending, she realized. It was a beginning of family, of legacy, of a love story that would continue to unfold for years to come. Virginia Brennan, once a desperate mail-order bride clutching a rejection letter, had found something far more valuable than the security she'd sought. She had found a love worth traveling across a continent for, a love that made every hardship worthwhile. And as she drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, their child growing beneath her heart, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The seasons of Montana Territory marched on, each bringing new joys and challenges to the Brennan Ranch. Summer's heat gave way to autumn's crisp embrace, and with it came the imminent arrival of their firstborn. On a stormy November night, while wind howled around the cabin's sturdy walls, Virginia brought their son into the world after hours of labor. Matthew, who had refused to leave her side despite the midwife's protests, wept openly when he first held the tiny, red-faced boy. "He's perfect," Matthew whispered, carefully placing the swaddled infant in Virginia's arms. "Just like his mother." Virginia gazed down at their child, overwhelmed by a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. "What shall we call him?" They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. "Thomas," Matthew suggested, "after Tom, who's been like a father to me, and James after your father." "Thomas James Brennan," Virginia tested the name. "It's perfect." Young Thomas thrived, growing from a quiet newborn to an active, curious toddler who followed Matthew everywhere, his small boots leaving tracks beside his father's larger ones. Virginia often watched them from the doorway as they tended the animals together, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. Tom Bishop, officially Grandpa Tom now, doted on the boy shamelessly. "He's got your stubbornness," Tom would tell Matthew with a wink. "And his mom has smarts, thank the Lord." Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, seasons and celebrations. Virginia continued teaching part-time, bringing Thomas with her when he was old enough. The sight of the young boy sitting contentedly on a blanket at the back of the schoolroom, reading from a picture book while his mother taught, became a familiar one in Riverside. When Thomas was 3, Virginia gave birth to their daughter, Elizabeth Rose. While Thomas was the image of his father with dark hair and serious blue eyes, little Elizabeth had Virginia's auburn curls and delicate features. "She's going to break hearts someday," Tom predicted as he bounced the infant on his knee. "Not for a very long time," Matthew replied firmly, though his eyes softened whenever his daughter smiled up at him. The ranch prospered under Matthew's careful management. They added rooms to the cabin as their family grew, turning it into a proper home with a large kitchen, a dedicated schoolroom where Virginia taught their children, and a music room where the old piano found a permanent place. They weathered hard times to a drought that threatened the cattle, a winter so harsh they lost part of the herd, a fever that swept through the valley and confined Elizabeth to bed for weeks. Her small face flushed with heat as Virginia and Matthew took turns bathing her forehead with cool cloths, praying for her recovery. Through it all, their love remained constant, deepening with shared joys and sorrows, strengthened by challenges overcome together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised Virginia with a gift she never expected. As they sat on their porch after the children were asleep, he handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "Open it." Inside was a book, a journal bound in soft leather. Virginia opened it to find Matthew's handwriting filling the pages. "I've been working on it for months," he explained as she leafed through in wonder. "It's our story, how we met, how we fell in love, for the children someday, so they'll know." Virginia traced the words with her fingertips, tears blurring her vision. "Matthew, this is beautiful." He took her hand, I wanted them to understand what brought us together, how sometimes what seems like the worst moment of your life can lead you exactly where you need to be. Virginia leaned against his shoulder, remembering that day at the stagecoach station when she'd clutched Harold Jenkins' crumpled letter, feeling as though her world had ended before it could begin. "You ever wonder what happened to him?" Matthew asked, following her thoughts as he often did. "Jenkins, sometimes. I heard he finally did marry the widow Carson," Matthew chuckled. "She'll keep him in line." Virginia closed the journal carefully. "You know, in an odd way, I'm grateful to him. If he hadn't rejected me, I might never have met you." "Then I'm grateful to him too," Matthew said, drawing her close. "Though he was still a fool." "He doesn't deserve me anyway," Virginia quoted with a smile. "That's what you said the first day we met." "Smartest thing I ever said." Matthew kissed her tenderly, followed closely by "I do." 15 years after Virginia stepped off the stagecoach in Riverside, the Brennan Ranch hosted a grand celebration for their anniversary. Friends from town and neighboring ranches gathered to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a local legend. Thomas, now 14 and nearly as tall as his father, helped manage the festivities with serious responsibility. 12-year-old Elizabeth, along with her 8-year-old brother James and 6-year-old sister Catherine, performed a musical arrangement they'd practiced for weeks. Tom Bishop, gray now and moving slower but still sharp as ever, raised a toast that brought tears to many eyes. "To Matthew and Virginia, who showed us all what true partnership looks like, and to that crumpled letter that brought them together." Later, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, Virginia found herself alone with Matthew near the apple orchard. The trees, once slender saplings, now stood tall and strong, heavy with fruit. "Remember when you showed me these trees?" she asked, taking his hand. "You said you believed in planning for the future." Matthew smiled, lines crinkling around his eyes, lines earned through years of laughter and squinting into Montana sunsets. "I never imagined how beautiful that future would be." Virginia leaned into his embrace, still feeling the same thrill at his touch that she had when they first met. "Nor did I." Together they watched their children playing tag among the trees, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. Tom sat on the porch, whittling a toy for young Catherine. The ranch building stood solid against the backdrop of the mountains, testament to years of hard work and careful stewardship. "We built something good here, didn't we?" Matthew murmured against her hair. "Something better than good," Virginia agreed. "Something that will last." As twilight deepened into night, stars emerging one by one above the valley that had become their kingdom, Virginia reflected on the long journey from that desperate day in Riverside. The mail-order bride with her crumpled letter had found not just a husband but a partner, not just security but profound joy. Love had transformed them both, Matthew from a solitary rancher into a devoted father and husband, Virginia from a displaced Easterner into a woman firmly rooted in the West's rich soil. Together, they had written a story more beautiful than either could have authored alone. And as Matthew drew her close for a kiss, as tender and promising as their first, Virginia knew with absolute certainty that their greatest chapters were still to come.